Greetings, my friends. Joey the Watchman here with another World War III scenario update, and this specific portion is going to focus on the South China Sea dispute and the whole North Korea and South Korea issue right now. And tensions are high in this area, and there's many tension points around the globe right now, specifically in the Middle East, and I've talked about a lot of those in the last couple years that I've been doing this. And one of the things that I had been telling you guys about and showing you even media coverage that was talking about this is that the United States and a few other of their allied nations are building military presences in the South China Sea. We talked about in Indonesia, we talked about in Australia, we talked about all along the South China Sea, and now we see Chinese warships over there, Korean warships, and even, of course, the United States warships. And this is an article that was posted on globalresearch.ca back on November the 17th. And it's talking about how the U.S. is building this military presence along China's soft underbelly. And we know about the conflict and the difference in opinions, especially on the Middle East as well, because Beijing has come out and said that any attack on Iran would be considered a direct attack on Beijing, if you remember those reports. And they're siding with Syria and Iran on this, as well as Russia is siding with China, Syria, and Iran in all of this. And you can see that NATO and everyone else, right, all the Western powers are on the other side of the fence. And you can see this global conflict of epic proportions slowly progressing forward with these various incremental steps that seem to be occurring. And this article talks a little bit more about that. I'm not going to get into it all, but it talks about specifically about how that they're developing bases in areas and such as Myanmar and Cambodia, and both of which are looked upon as allies of China, right? And it goes on to talk about some other areas, and that the Pentagon, as it says here, is expanding their counter-terrorism assistance to unlikely corners of the globe as part of a strategy to deploy elite special operations forces as advisors to counties far from Al-Qaeda's or Al-Qaeda's strongholds in the Middle East and North Africa. And these countries include the Philippines, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Cambodia, and the Pentagon officials seem little concerned that all those countries are not on the list of those which respect human rights. And it goes on to talk a little bit more about this here. But the main thing I wanted to include this is to show you that they are building a military presence along the South China Sea area, and we'll look a little bit more into that here as we get to the next piece. And in fact, we had seen U.S. President Barack Obama going all to the Southeast Asian states, and this was back in November. He was visiting, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, some of the places that we had just mentioned, that are all part of the ASEAN nations over there, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And if you remember recently, I had actually done a video with immense amounts of information in it and links to articles and so forth talking about this situation down there in Southeast Asia. And I think it was titled, "Is a War Looming in the Asia Pacific?" So if you just go onto YouTube, type in "Is a War Looming in the Asia Pacific" by Joey B613, that should come up, because that was my old channel that I had done that report on. But here we see also that, as reported back in November, that Obama came out and said that Asia is crucial to the United States' future. And he also cautioned about the escalation in Israel, but we're going to talk about the Israel and the Middle East situation in my next update that I'm going to upload. But again, we see Obama reiterating his focus and his strategical pivot, if you will, in a military perspective towards the United States, towards Asia by the United States. And this article from Fox News actually talks a little bit more about that. So that'll be in the links below. And this is a piece that I wanted to also include, and it too is from November, and we'll get to some more recent pieces in just a second. But it says here that Obama's Southeast Asia tour menacing, according to Chinese Daily. And it goes on to mention here that U.S. President Barack Obama's tour to Southeast Asia has a menacing manner, said a Chinese daily. An article in the Global Times said that Obama's presence has stirred up assumptions about the 10-member ASEAN politics as the 21st ASEAN Summit and its related meetings kicked off in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And there's a quote here. It says that it seems that there is a contest between China's and the U.S. strategic expectations for ASEAN, said the Daily Monday. They also said that Obama's tour seemingly has a menacing manner, but it cannot change the reality that Southeast Asia is economically tied to China. And it says here, it said the proposition that countries should rely on the U.S. to balance China is tempting, but ASEAN countries lack experience in dealing with great powers. So you can see the U.S. trying to poke their nose in there, and it goes on to talk more about it here, saying that they may risk becoming the puppet of countries like the U.S. and Japan, it warned. The article observed that increased U.S. engagement in East Asia will certainly bring China more trouble. And it goes on to mention a few more facts and figures here in regards to this. As it states, President Obama's visit to Cambodia was the first by a U.S. president, which underlines an expansion of U.S. military and economic interests in Asia under last year's so-called pivot from conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan. And that was reported by Reuters. Also reported by Reuters here, we see that it says the Philippines, Australia, and other parts of the region have seen a resurgence of U.S. warships, planes, and personnel since Obama began shifting his foreign economic and security policy towards Asia late last year. Also, from the Taipei Times, it says, the U.S. and China are heading toward a more strained relationship with increased mutual distrust. A new study by David Shambaugh, the director of China Policy Program at George Washington University, has shown. Also from Bloomberg, we had this report come out stating that according to a recent draft of an annual report mandated by the U.S. Congress, China is the most threatening actor in cyberspace as its intelligence agencies and hackers use increasingly sophisticated techniques to gain access to U.S. military computers and defense contractors. And this other fact that they've got posted here reads, a report by Northrop Grumman in March concluded that China's cyber capabilities are advanced enough to disrupt U.S. military operations during a conflict over Taiwan. And we know about the Diaoyu Islands dispute going on over there, which seems to be the center and focus of this entire situation. But even more than that, just like I had shown you in previous pieces and articles done by many prominent figures who are in the know, that there are, in the South China Sea lies, one of the world's largest mineral deposits and oil reserves and so forth in there, and I think that's the heart of the matter here. But again, very symbolic of the biblical times in which we live and how humans' greed is going to cause nation to rise against nation and so forth. And recently we had also seen many of the major nations of the world, Russia came out and said it, and China said that they were going to move away from the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And we have been seeing the reports I've been showing you guys about the large amounts of debt owned by or the U.S. debt that's owed to places like China and even Russia, and even Japan. And so China has this large debt, and we already see them buying companies all over the U.S., all over North America for that matter. They just bought the oil, Nexen oil there up here in Canada. They're taking over all kinds of high corporate firms in the United States, and this piece talks more about how the Chinese yuan is isolating the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. And China is actually overtaking the United States, and already has, pretty much, as the world's top economy. And it goes on to mention in the piece that China's official currency, the yuan, is set to rise to the status of an international currency as more nations abandon the U.S. dollar to peg their currency to the Chinese yuan. We also see various military exercises and drills, and military exercises and drills are normal. but on larger scales than ever before, more frequently than ever before, and more nations partaking than ever before. And we're going to look at a few articles on the different drills that are taking place specifically in these regions. And we see here that South Korea was holding a military drill on the Yeonpyeong border island on the anniversary of the shelling of the island by North Korea in 2010. So you see they do it on the anniversary in which they were shelled by the North, and we know that North and South Korea are constantly in conflict, so sending a message there by holding the drill on the actual anniversary. And as we see in this piece here, from reports according to Reuters news agency, it states that China's space activities are raising U.S. satellite security concerns. And you know, they're throwing all these satellites up into space. And you know, if I showed you on my previous channel and on my old website, theexaltedtruth.com, that Vladimir Putin's speech, I believe it was at the United Nations General Assembly or one of them. Maybe it wasn't there actually, but anyways, he came out in a speech, and I showed you the exact speech where he said, "Star Wars is no longer fictional; it's a reality. People are militarizing space with satellites and so forth," and that's what we see alluded to in this fact. And it's not just China; it's the U.S. It's many nations. You know, there's not just one nation to blame. It's just the inherent corruption of sinful greed within humanity now that grown leaders that are supposed to, you know, lead our nations can't even, you know, sit down as adults and talk out matters without destroying and killing and destruction. It's sad, you know. They don't even know that they're not. It shouldn't even be nation against nation. What they're really battling is spiritual warfare, and that it's good versus evil. And if they just chose to do what's good and what's right, all these nations just did that, you know, and were willing to make the necessary sacrifices to, you know, actually promote the betterment of humanity as a whole, well, then, you know, things may be different. But again, the Bible tells us that is almost impossible for the human race to conceive with our sinful nature now that has been corrupted since the days of Eden. And, you know, again, it's important to reiterate that when this Antichrist kingdom and beast system spoken of in the book of Revelation comes to power, you know, before that happens, as I told you, the path to that one world government or new world order or Antichrist kingdom, if you will, is through economic collapse, world war, and climate chaos. And they're going to make all of these happen, and they're going to step in with, oh, we have the answer. One world government, no more wars, no more economic collapse, everything will be restored. It's going to come in peace and safety just like the Bible tells us. But it says peace and safety, and there will not be peace and safety. See? And it will be headed up by the Antichrist figure who will, you know, people will worship him. And many are going to be deceived. The Bible tells us that he deceives the whole world in this time. And so we see the incremental steps towards the implementation of this new world order occurring right before our very eyes. And I'm going to be doing a specific video on global government and all the things that, all the quotes that have been out, all the events that have transpired very soon. And it'll probably be roughly an hour plus, but we're going to include all kinds of information in that to show people that this is not just a conspiracy, because even a lot of Christians say, oh, well, that's just conspiracy talk, that one world government. Well, read your Bible. It tells us this, you know. But anyway, so we see in this piece here that they're concerned about these satellites being put up into space, as well as we see here U.S. cited Chinese potential to target satellites at higher orbits. And it talks a little bit more about it here in this piece. But again, we see another aspect or another dynamic of this conflict here. And, you know, also not long ago, I had shown you guys the reports on the Chinese selling, you know, fake aircraft parts and so forth, not only to the United States, but some of these parts were making their way into Canada as well, because Canada gets you know, most of their stuff from the United States, you know. And you know, I had talked about how China's also buying up you know, corporations in Canada as well, and it's all part of this of the times in which we live. But we see here, and this was reported on January the 9th, so a couple weeks ago, and we see that now fake parts in these Hercules aircraft are called a genuine risk. And it says here that CBC News has confirmed that some of Canada's new Hercules military transport planes have counterfeit Chinese parts in their cockpits that could leave pilots with blank instrument panels in mid-flight. And that's dangerous. Which basically turns Canada's own, or the U.S., if they have, because they have the fake parts in theirs as well, into just weapons against their own people. You won't be able to navigate, you know? And it goes on to mention that documents show the Canadian military has known about the bogus electronic chips in the giant Hercules C-130J aircraft since at least July of 2012, but continued to hide the fact during a CBC News investigation that occurred months later. And meanwhile, over to defensetech.org, we see that in the midst of China's economic boom, we see that they are developing more in terms of military force as well, and air force, and so forth. And we see that as they debut, I've shown you in previous videos, new missiles, new capabilities, and this is just another example of that, as China debuted their homegrown C-17 clone. And it says the Y-20 looks a lot like the Boeing-built C-17 used by the United States Air Force, but critics say it falls short of the Globemaster III's performance in a number of respects. But again, it's just symbolic of the increasing capabilities of China. So this will be linked below as well for anyone who's interested in checking that out. Moving on, we see this piece from the Global Times. That rising China-U.S. tensions are actually heading towards a military confrontation potentially, and it says here that China's priority is to maintain our attitude to the Diaoyu Islands. And I talked about the territorial disputes over these Diaoyu Islands. We have to help other sides properly understand us. There should be no ambiguity when it comes to China's willingness to counterattack in the event of a military provocation. As long as there is understanding, the words of the U.S. won't seem so important. And it goes on to talk about how if the situation leads to conflict, the United States forces in Japan will take further actions to exert pressure on China, and China should be psychologically prepared for this. Some elements of the Diaoyu Islands dispute and the South China Sea disputes will be partly transformed into a competition between China and the U.S. If we regard Hillary Clinton's remarks as a significant change, the whole diplomatic strategy of our country should be revised, and the importance of our national rejuvenation needs to be re-examined. And it goes on to talk more about it here, but again, it's just more of the same that I've been talking about for some time, about the looming conflict over there in the Asia-Pacific and the South China Sea region, which I might add is just one of many areas that are high tension points around the globe right now. I'll also link you guys up below with this piece talking more about the Pentagon's, as they call it here, next human battleground in the Pacific Ocean, and talks a lot about the conflicts with China and the different corporations involved and so forth, but it does mention that and I'll read this top piece here, that the Pentagon planners and their paid anthropologist shills are gearing up for the Pentagon's next battle, the one for the Pacific that will ensure that the island nations that dot the vast maritime expanse will remain a part of the Anglo-American sphere of influence and not become part of the Chinese lake, of a Chinese lake. So it's all to counter China. You see the tensions there. The Pacific Ocean has been a favorite stomping ground for the U.S. government-financed anthropologists ever since Margaret Mead's 1928 treatise on the Samoan people. Coming of age in Samoa laid the groundwork for the intelligence-related anthropological study of the peoples of the Pacific Ocean by the U.S. military and intelligence services. Meade later became a researcher for the CIA-connected RAND Corporation and became a supporter of CIA funding of anthropologic surveys and studies via laundered academic research grants from the U.S. Agency for International Development. Goes on to say that CIA/Special Operations projects with names like Phoenix, Brosms, Simpatico, and Camelot used anthropologists and social scientists to reconnoiter targeted tribal areas in South Vietnam, Indonesia, Pakistan, Colombia, Chile, and all to determine how U.S. Special Forces and intelligence agents could use indigenous peoples to further American military goals. The operations in the cases of Phoenix in South Vietnam and Brosms in Indonesia resulted in genocide on a massive scale. And, I mean, the article is pretty extensive, so I'm not going to read the entire thing here. But it's a piece I definitely wanted to link you guys up with. And in other news, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says that he is open to holding a summit with Chinese leaders to improve the bilateral ties troubled by these territorial disputes down in the Asia-Pacific. However, the Chinese don't appear to be interested in negotiating for these islands. They believe that they are theirs and are willing to, have that come to fruition and have everyone understand that by any means necessary. And we see that we had Chinese ships sailing near the islands that were disputed by Tokyo and Beijing, as 3 ships belonging to China's government have been reportedly sailing near a group of islands disputed by Beijing and Tokyo in the East China Sea. And these ships are Chinese surveillance ships. We also see we see that the Chinese now are actually conducting naval drills in the Pacific amid all this tension. And it mentions here that 3 advanced Chinese warships left port on Wednesday for naval drills and war games in the Western Pacific, and the fleet will likely pass through disputed waters in the East and South China Sea, state media said. We had also seen China come out and rebuke Hillary Clinton for her comments on the disputed islands over there, as she said she assured Japan that the islands dispute would be taken care of, and that China would not claim authority over these islands and so forth. And now China came out and rebuked her for those comments. So that's we just see more escalation of tensions and saber rattling here. And moving on here, we've got this piece from the South China Morning Post, a Chinese news outlet, saying that Xi has came out and stated that China will not waive its legitimate international rights. And the Communist Party chief says that the nation will stick to its peaceful development path as tensions with Tokyo over the Diaoyu Islands linger. So they're not willing to budge in any way, shape, or form. And for those of you who don't know, who have maybe just be tuning in, the Diaoyu Islands are a group of uninhabited islands located roughly due east of mainland China, northeast of Taiwan, west of Okinawa Island, and north of the southwestern end of the Ryukyu Islands. They're currently controlled by Japan, which calls them the Senkaku Islands, I believe, and both China and Taiwan are claiming sovereignty over these islands, but they are currently controlled by Japan. So you can see the conflict rising there. Meanwhile, over on navaltoday.com, which is a source for all the Navy news, we see that the U.S. is now sending the amphibious assault ship to White Beach in Okinawa, and I just mentioned Okinawa and where it's situated down there in the Asia Pacific or the South China Sea region near the disputed islands. And it says that this amphibious assault ship, the USS Bonhomme Richard, LHD-6, departed for White Beach, Okinawa, on January the 30th. So just yesterday they went over there. And so we see another massive aircraft carrier and warship heading over there to the region as tensions flare. And this also came out yesterday from navaltoday.com, talking about how the USS Albuquerque SSN 706 was deployed yesterday from a naval base in Point Loma for a scheduled 6-month Western Pacific deployment. And so they're going over there to the in the Pacific as well. And we see that this is a Los Angeles, or excuse me, it says here, the Los Angeles class fast attack submarines deployment is in support of the nation's maritime strategy. And again, we see that the focus is going to this, the tensions and the focus from the U.S. slowly pivoting strategically to the Pacific. Another piece here from navaltoday.com talking more about that particular region, and it states here that the Royal New Zealand Navy has hosted a meeting of international navies to promote common understandings for the coordination of shipping and maritime trade in the Pacific, Indian, and South Atlantic Oceans, as tensions over territorial disputes endanger these procedures. And it mentions here that the Pacific and Indian Ocean's Shipping Working Group was held at the Devonport Naval Base in Auckland this week, and included representatives from 12 countries, including Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, France, India, Korea, New Zealand, Singapore, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So, I reported on the Asia Pacific and South China Sea disputes and the territorial issues over the Diaoyu Islands multiple occasions on my old channel several times, and went in depth and in great detail on the matter. And we see that situation is not dying down anytime soon. In fact, it's escalating. So in the midst of all of that, not too far from that region, we have the dynamic of North Korea as well in all of this. And so we'll talk about North Korea and their involvement here in an escalation of tensions and saber rattling, so to speak, as we see. In my previous videos, I had shown you that they had been threatening that their missiles could reach the U.S. On several occasions, and that's even come out in the media, and other Asian news agencies have reported on this. But this here piece was reported on December the 7th. And we see that the United States actually sent warships as North Korea prepared their rocket launch, if you remember that. And it says here the United States shifted 4 warships into position to track and possibly defend against a planned North Korean rocket launch, while urging Pyongyang to cancel its second such attempt this year. And it mentions here the Aegis guided missile cruiser Shiloh and 3 guided missile destroyers, the John S. McCain, Benfold, and Fitzgerald, will be put in place as a prudent precaution, officials told NBC News. The Navy ship's guided missile will attempt to intercept and destroy the North Korean missile if it veers off course and threatens either Japan or the Philippines. And it does go on to mention a little bit about the Asia-Pacific region here, and it says that it should seem logical that we'll move them around so that we have the best situational awareness. Said a admiral who commands U.S. forces in the Asia-Pacific region, and he told a Pentagon news conference that, according to Reuters reports, and so we see that they're continuing to test these missile launches and so forth, and they go ahead and fire the rocket here, as we see reported by the Associated Press and CBC News, that North Korea fires this long-range rocket. And it mentions here North Korea fired a long-range rocket Wednesday morning, and and this was reported on December 11th. Wednesday morning in its second launch under its new leader, defying warnings from the United Nations and Washington only days before South Korean presidential elections. North Korea declared the launch of a rocket and satellite a success, and state television planned a special broadcast about the launch at noon local time. South Korean and Japanese officials confirmed that liftoff took place shortly before 10 a.m. Along with the U.S., they had been urging North Korea to refrain from a launch widely seen as a cover for a test of banned ballistic missile technology. Meanwhile, the United Nations have considered sanctioning North Korea for that rocket launch. And this came out a day after those previous reports in which North Korea deemed their satellite and missile launch or rocket launch a success. And it says the United Nations Security Council is considering an appropriate response after North Korea successfully launched a long-range missile on Wednesday, similar in design to a model capable of carrying a nuclear-tipped warhead as far as California. Then, of course, just days ago, North Korea, they're not stopping with just those two tests. They're threatening a third nuclear test. As we see here, North Korea's top governing body warned Thursday that the regime will conduct its third nuclear test in defiance of the United Nations punishment, and made clear that its long-range rockets are designed to carry not only satellites but also warheads aimed at striking the United States. The National Defense Commission, headed by the country's young leader, Kim Jong-un, rejected Tuesday's UN Security Council resolution condemning North Korea's long-range rocket launch in December as a banned missile activity and expanding sanctions against the regime. The Commission reaffirmed in its declaration that the launch was a peaceful bid to send a satellite into space, but also said the country's rocket launches have a military purpose to strike and attack the United States. So, take that with a grain of salt, because I'm sure that, if they were actually planning on this, they wouldn't come out and say, we're going to attack you, but definitely not ruling it out and talking about it publicly shows their frustration. And it goes on to talk about how North Korea scorned the UN missile test sanctions. Again, I'll link you up with this piece, but on top of all the territorial disputes already going on in the Asia-Pacific and the South China Sea between Japan, Taiwan and China and the U.S., and we got North Korea into that dynamic in that particular area as well. And that's not even talking about the territorial disputes going on, over the Falkland and islands down there in Argentina, between Britain and Argentina, or the territorial disputes going on by several nations up in the Arctic as that melts at a record pace. And, of course, we got the Middle East and Africa as well. You can see the slow progression of worldwide militarized confrontation. And again, it's very symbolic of the times in which we live. The Bible tells us nation will rise against nation, wars and rumors of wars. Now, and this is another report that just recently came out on Friday, and it talks about how North Korea has came right out and threatened to take physical countermeasures against South Korea following a UN resolution that they adopted against Pyongyang for its rocket launch that we just showed you in December. And they're also, as I showed you in the piece, they're planning a third test. So again, no signs of this slowing down anytime soon, unfortunately. In fact, even China has come out and said that they will reduce their assistance to North Korea if Pyongyang carries out these further nuclear tests that they have been, touting for the last few days as a third nuclear missile-capable test. So again, China is going to cut aid to North Korea over these nuclear tests. And also, South Korea speaking up again, saying that according to South Korean President Lee Myung-bak, he's warned that North Korea will face serious consequences if Pyongyang goes ahead with its planned high-level nuclear test. And also, just days ago, I'll finish off with this piece here for this particular update. We see that North Korea has actually ordered important state measures to be taken. And it mentions here that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered the country's top security officials to take substantial and high-profile important state measures. It goes on to mention that Kim's order for firm action came on Sunday, while state media reported that the North Korean leader had advanced specific tasks to the officials concerned. The move came a day after Pyongyang reiterated that it would carry out a third high-level nuclear test in defiance of fresh UN sanctions against its rocket launch back in December of 2012. A nuclear test is the demand of the people, Radong Sinmun, the official daily newspaper of the ruling Communist Party, said on Saturday. The Daily further said that the demand of the people is that we must do something even greater than a nuclear test. The United Nations Security Council has left us with no other options. We have no other ways but to push forward to the final showdown. And it goes on to mention how on Friday the East Asian nation said the recent UN sanctions amounted to a declaration of war and threatened South Korea with physical countermeasures. If you remember, I had shown you that piece as well, if it partakes in the sanctions, and they have. As long as the South Korean puppet traders regime continues with its anti-North Korea hostile policy, we will never sit down with them. So you can see the tensions are just escalating and escalating, and the saber rattling continues, and it remains to be seen whether or not cooler heads can prevail, or if something can be done to avert any type of military confrontation. But again, my friends, I will say to you that this is symbolic of the signs of the times and the biblical prophetic fulfillments that the divinely inspired Word of God has already communicated to us, right? Just like I said, nation will rise against nation. You will hear wars and rumors of wars. And there are many other scriptures that talk about this. And it's just another way that, they're going to implement this global government, right? Because they're going to tout it as, oh, it's peace and safety, no borders, no war. It's going to sound amazing. I can make global government sound amazing, that everybody would want it. And that's what they're going to do. And most people aren't aware of the truths behind the scenes and what the Bible actually tells us about this, are going to accept this, and they're going to worship this Antichrist figure and worship the beast image and take the mark of the beast, and thus have themselves in, basically eternal damnation, or, well, not eternal damnation, but they're going to miss out on the rewards that come with accepting God into your life and acquiring that free gift of eternal everlasting life and salvation through the only way it can be had, and that's Jesus Christ, the divine Son of God, and the gateway He provided with His sacrifice on Calvary. So anyway, I'm going to end this update here. God bless, my friends, and much love to you all.